Hello, and the purpose of this video is to go over an article in the Mormon Worker. This will be the third installment. This will be the third installment of this series on Mormon anarchism. There will be more articles coming, but this is the third installment. This is number 3, Mormon anarchism. And the title of this article is Cooperation, a Common Principle of Mormonism and Anarchism by Jason Brown. And this came in the issue number 2 of the Mormon Worker, right? Issue number 2 of the Mormon Worker. Cooperation, a Common Principle of Mormonism and Anarchism. So right. So we can go through this. I'm just, as usually, I'm gonna like go over it and comment critically, right? Just read and then comment critically. That's what I'm gonna try to do here. So, Cooperation, a Common Principle of Mormonism and Anarchism by Jason Brown. Late 1800s, the Mormon pioneers, exiled to the Utah Territory, implemented one of the largest experiments in cooperative living that the United States has ever known. They wanted to create a society with no rich and no poor. This society would be built, among other things, on the principle of cooperativism. Cooperation is the simple notion that when people work together, as opposed to competing with one another, they can achieve economic and political goals without backbreaking work or the stratification of society that the capitalist system requires. Okay, I just want to say one thing here. In a hypothetical anarcho-capitalist voluntary society, there will be room for workers to get together and form cooperatives if they want to. This comment, the stratification of society that the capitalist system requires, and I can only speak for Sweden, right? This is where I am. Sweden is not a capitalist system. Okay, Sweden is not a market. Like, the official name of Sweden is a market democracy. It's not. The market is controlled. The democracy is questionable. You know, if you look at the European Union, the official line is that the European Union is what is it called? A social market, right? The problem is that there is very little social content, and the market is controlled. It's not a free market. It's a controlled market. The same in Sweden. It's a controlled market. So perhaps the stratification of society that in Sweden the controlled market requires, right? Anyhow, the value of cooperation can also be found in much of the political theory of anarchism, which as a body of ideas is probably one of the most misunderstood in mainstream society. The most common misconception is that anarchists advocate chaos, and that an anarchist organization is an oxymoron. Anarchism is also associated with violence, and media portrayals of anarchists seem to suggest that we are simply a ragtag group of black-wearing stone throwers who relish the opportunity to vandalize corporate property during anti-globalization rallies. I think he's referring to the Black Bloc. Anarchist ideas have a long and vibrant history in the United States. Right. Anarchist ideas have a long and vibrant history in the United States, much of which is nonviolent. In anarchist writings, there is a stubborn utopianism that continues to push humanity in the direction of greater equality, solidarity, and dignity. And this issue of the stubborn utopianism. And I know I'm going to be criticized for this, so I might as well admit to it. I am a stubborn utopian. You bet, I am. I'm a stubborn utopian. Not in the sense, and I know Marxism criticizes utopianism because they say that utopia has no material basis, therefore utopia is impossible because the premise of utopia is pure idealism with no material basis, ergo it can never be implemented. I understand the Marxist criticism. The scientific socialist criticism of utopian socialism, I understand it completely. I understand, Karl Marx's criticism of Robert Owen, right? I understand it. However, I am a stubborn utopian, in that I posit, again, looking at the Swedish context, I posit 4 possible alternatives to the Swedish state. You know, the one that I would really like would be the Marxist Trotskyist worker state. You know, which is premised upon the working class, which is premised upon the working class seizing power collectively, primarily through the seizure of the means of production contained in their workplaces, and then on that basis, creating the superstructure, the political superstructure of a state premised upon election and recall of workplace delegates, a government of worker ministers, and a workers' militia that protects the collectivized property forms, thus becoming the essence of the worker state. The essence of the worker state would be the workers' militia. That's the kind of state I would like. However, I wouldn't mind the anarcho-syndicalist, which is the anarchist communist alternative coming out of the SAC Union. And I mean, the Marxist Trotskyist worker state is like coming out of the Swedish Trotskyists at Marxist.se. Roughly is what they believe in. But the second option would be the anarcho-syndicalist voluntary association of cooperative groups, which is the ultimate goal of the SAC Union, which is the anarchist union in Sweden. And yeah, so that would be another alternative to the Swedish state, a voluntary association of cooperative groups, the pure form of dictatorship of the proletariat, premised upon also upon the seizure of the means of production by the as a collective act of the working class. That would be another example. But you know, so those are the 2 radical socialist examples. There is also an anarcho-capitalist example, which is a third alternative to the Swedish state that I wouldn't mind, which is the voluntary society. And the voluntary society simply means that, the voluntary society will contain, sovereign individuals, entrepreneurial initiatives, cooperatives, voluntary societies inside voluntary societies, and which would take on the functions of the state, right? Because an existing context of a pure free market, and a true and pure free market can only exist in the absence of the state. So the Swedish state would be abolished through a process of a process of systematic radical privatizations, which would privatize its functions one by one, including the police and the military. And then the result will be a voluntary society existing in context of a pure free market. And in that context, of course, it will be a context for sovereign individuals to thrive, and entrepreneurs and workers' cooperatives too, if the workers want to. So that would be a third alternative. And the fourth alternative, of course, is the most utopian of all. The fourth alternative would be Gaia, right? The Gaia, which is also called ecotopia, right? There was a book written about this. But Gaia is far more radical than ecotopia, because in Gaia, the industrial system is abolished, right? It's not just the state, it's the industrial system itself that is dismantled. And people go back to the state of nature, right? And the way people survive the state of nature is by reestablishing primitive communism, forms of primitive communism. Where it would be based on hunting, gathering, and agriculture, and communal village living type arrangements. It's like a restoration of the natural state But that's Gaia is it is the most consistently radical, and it is the best of all the utopias. But I mean, to get from this to Gaia is, I mean, it's not gonna happen overnight. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that I admit that I am a stubborn utopian. Anarchist ideas have a long and vibrant history in the United States, much of which is nonviolent. In anarchist writings, there is a stubborn utopianism that continues to push humanity in a direction of greater equality, solidarity, and dignity. Even a cursory glance at anarchist literature and practice reveals an uncompromising commitment to freedom, self-determination, cooperation, and social justice. Though Mormonism and anarchism are hardly thought of as compatible worldviews, they both hold a deep commitment to community, solidarity, and cooperativism. Yeah, and below I will briefly outline cooperation from the perspective of both Mormon history and anarchist practice. So the Mormon cooperative movement of the 1800s. Robert Owen is best known for the popularization of cooperativism, who formed the Rochdale Society of Equitable Pioneers in 1884. The society attempted to alleviate the pressures of the English Industrial Revolution and promoted the principles of self-reliance, equality, solidarity, and democracy. What is sometimes overlooked, though, is that around the same time, Mormon pioneers were practicing cooperation in the Utah Territory with astounding success. A cooperative can take many forms. Member and worker-owned are the most important for our purposes. Both types of co-ops are owned by the people that benefit from them. Worker-owned by the workers. Member-owned by the members. Member-owned co-ops are typically stores. Owners elect a board of directors, and the board usually hires an executive director. Worker-owned co-ops tend to be run by the workers themselves, depending on the site. So yeah, I mean, the idea of worker-run, cooperative arrangements where workers run the workplace collectively and collectively control means of production. That's is that socialism? Not quite. Cooperativism is not quite socialism, because you can have cooperativism inside the voluntary society, which is a pure free market, and you could have cooperativism in context of a Gaian primitive communism. Sure, why not? But the socialism is a specific political economy, that has to be premised upon workers' power, and there's, so, right. And if you take the anarcho-syndicalist voluntary association of cooperative groups, maybe this version of Mormon cooperativism would be more compatible with the anarcho-syndicalist voluntary association of cooperative groups. After intense persecution in Missouri, Mormon pioneers began a mass migration to what is now the state of Utah, which was then a part of Mexico. It is interesting to note that these Mormon pioneers left the United States, or as they saw it, fleeing from Babylon, an ironic fact considering contemporary Mormonism's zealous patriotism. In the late 1800s, a variety of member and worker-owned cooperatives were an important tool of the Mormon United Order movement for promoting equality and attempting to put the brakes on expanding American capitalism in the Utah Territory. It is estimated that between the years 1868 and 1884, over 200 cooperative enterprises were formed under the direction of Brigham Young. At this time, there was a growing fear of outsiders and the proliferation of trading companies, about which Brigham Young states, quote, "There is a class of men who are here to pick the pockets of the Latter-day Saints and then use the means they get from us to bring about our destruction," end quote. Church leaders feared that the growing Gentile merchant trader class was charging too much money for their goods and threatening the self-reliance of its membership. Church policy was aimed to ensure that no person was making exorbitant profits, which created an early stigma attached to anyone dubbed a profiteering saint. These enterprises were, from the beginning, formed to protect and promote equality, community self-reliance, and community unity, to encourage maximum production through home industry as opposed to consumption and trading. Okay, so basically the Mormons set up this cooperative network arrangement in Utah in the late 1800s. Something called the Mormon United Order movement. which was made up of a variety of member and worker-owned cooperatives. Okay, interesting. Yeah. These enterprises were, from the beginning, formed to protect and promote equality, community self-reliance, and community unity, to encourage maximum production through home industry as opposed to consumption and trading. Cooperatives were created to ensure that the wealth that was generated from trade was equally distributed among the people and was used for the, quote, building up of the kingdom of God, end quote. And this would be to fund the missionary activity of the Mormons, right? As Brigham Young states, so the Mormon Church in that era was dedicated to two things: the cooperative movement and evangelization. Great, love it. As Brigham Young states, the purpose of cooperation was to bring goods here and sell them as low as they can possibly be sold, and let the profits be divided with the people at large, and to, quote, guard against the development of a moneyed class among the later day saints themselves, which would rend the social fabric and destroy cohesion and unity. Right. So they wanted to guard against the development of a moneyed class among the later day saints themselves. Yeah, they wanted to avoid like the emergence of a kind of like in the Soviet Union when Lenin implemented the NEP and the kulaks, right? Something like that. Brigham Young also did not want that to happen. Eventually, the kulaks were liquidated by the Soviet government, but I don't think Brigham Young would have done that or whatever. I mean, let's face it, Brigham Young was not V.I. Lenin. He was not V.I. Lenin, right? So, in 1869, the Scions Cooperative Mercantile Institution was established as a joint stock company in Salt Lake City, or a member-owned cooperative. By church mandate, CCMI then became the central distributor of all goods imported into the territory, with each settlement charged to establish similar cooperatives at the local level. Members were admonished to only do business with the ward and community cooperative stores. So it was like a closed economy that they created here. Yeah, another controlled market. Yeah, controlled market, but based on cooperatives. Yeah, I'm not sure that was a good idea to create controlled markets. It's not good. It's counterproductive. Controlled markets don't work in the end. You end up with a stagflation. Like Sweden. Sweden is a controlled market, right? And what what is the Swedish economy? The Swedish economy is a controlled market, and what happens? What is the government doing? What is the Swedish state doing? It is engaged in a policy of managed stagflation, right? Because the product of the control market is eventually stagflation, and that is what Sweden is dealing with. That's why Sweden has the fourth largest unemployment rate in Europe. That is why they have all these subsidized employment schemes which cover up the unemployment rate. Yeah, I mean, there is some flexibility when it comes to small businesses, and there's a lot of successful, and in terms of entrepreneurs, Sweden is relatively okay, not exactly utopia, but I mean, people who started a small business here have a good chance of doing well, So entrepreneurs here could thrive if they wanted to with a small business. And again, I make a difference between capitalist and an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is an innovator who starts his own business, and whatever. Whether it's a capitalist, it's somebody who engages in systematic, extraction of a surplus value from the workers. That's different. But an entrepreneur is an innovator. It's a different thing. Yeah. So yeah, they allow for entrepreneurs in the Swedish control market because obviously they want to profit from it. They want to use the entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneurs are not really free because the entrepreneurs here are under the supervision of the state. Everything they do is regulated and they're heavily taxed. So, yeah. So whatever, But yeah, I mean the workers in Sweden, the Swedish workers, are doubly exploited. On the one hand, they have to, they are subjected to extraction of surplus value, and on the other hand, they're subject to taxation. So they're subject to the exploitation of both the state and the capitalist. While capitalist, right? Capitalist, and again, I mean capitalist in the sense of agorism, the capitalist versus the entrepreneurs, two separate groups of people. By using the terminology capitalism, I am not suggesting that the Swedish state is capitalist. The Swedish state is not the Swedish economy is not capitalist. The Swedish economy is a controlled market. For legitimate capitalism, you need a pure free market, and a pure free market can only exist in the absence of the state. So you would have to abolish the state for a pure free market to emerge. And I mean, the true market, the true free market is the black market. So once you remove the state, the black market ceases to be black and becomes the market. And from that foundation, then you get the pure free market of anarcho-capitalism, which becomes the context for the voluntary society. But yeah, but that is not what Brigham Young and the Mormons were doing. Right. Let's read in Okay, the Zion Cooperative Mercantile Institution. Members were admonished to only do business with the ward and community cooperative stores, control market. Brigham Young believed that CZMI's monopoly on regional trade was justified due to its public ownership, low prices, and the importance given to production over distribution. In other words, it was a measure to keep what was perceived as Babylon from enslaving the saints. And Babylon, of course, is the American capitalist economy in the 19th century, which later became dominated by robber barons such as J.P. Morgan. And I mean, J.P. Morgan was a robber baron. He was a capitalist, exploiter, octopus, whatever. But he was a good man. Right. So that's Babylon, right? Despite the centralized control of CCMI, at the local level, provisions were made so that everyone could own stock, and some co-ops were even limited the amount of stock that could be owned by any one individual, some even maintaining the classic one-member, one-vote system for electing its board of directors. After CZMI was established, cooperative industry was encouraged in practically every aspect of economic life. Enterprises such as ironworking, farming, butcher shops, molasses mills, shoe manufacture, wool manufacture, furniture makers, textiles, cotton, and tanneries all formed under the cooperative principles and structures. These industries formed a network of economic solidarity and mutual support that rivaled any other territory or region in the continent. I see. So they created a cooperative economy. The early Mormons created a cooperative economy under Brigham Young. Wow, and interesting. That is what should have been done in the early Soviet Union. In the early Soviet Union, the trade unions took over the workers were to control the means of production, but then overall economic activity was coordinated by the trade unions, right? At least at first. And then came the Civil War, and all that system collapsed. And then it was necessary in order to revive the Soviet economy after the Civil War to install NEP, the new economic policy, which apparently Lenin established a gold standard. I think it was called the Chardonnay or something like that. He established a gold standard. Lenin recognized the value of a gold standard. Take note, those who are anarcho-capitalist. And yeah, he proceeded to allow for a limited amount of private ownership and whatever. But what Lenin should have done is he should have done what Brigham Young did in the early Mormon settlements. He should have created a cooperative economy like the Mormons did. Would have been then maybe socialism would have had a better chance of emerging from that economy. Yeah. Enterprises such as ironworking, farming, butcher shops, molasses mills, shoe manufacture, wool manufacture, furniture makers, textiles, cotton, and tanneries all formed under cooperative principles and structures. These industries form a network of economic solidarity and mutual support that rivaled that of any other territory or region in the continent. In 1882, John Taylor stopped official church sponsorship of the cooperative movement. Okay, so it lasted only until 1882. Okay. But Boyce his emphatic support for the principles of cooperation. So originally Mormons were cooperativistic. Okay. Eventually, local businessmen began to gain control of the co-ops, and the stock fell into fewer and fewer hands. In addition, the ridicule and pressure from the U.S. laissez-faire system became too much for cooperativism, and they have practically vanished without a trace in the formal economic sector. Exactly. So American laissez-faire, 19th century American laissez-faire robber baron capitalism is what absorbed the sort of like absorb and overpower the cooperative advantage without a trace in the formal economic sector through LDS communities practice a vibrant tradition of mutual aid and cooperation. I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to read Anarchism and Cooperation very quickly, and that's it. I'm going to close with that. And then I'll put the link in the description to this article, and you can read the rest for yourself. It's really good. It's a good study on anarchism and cooperation principles in context of Mormonism. Through the cooperatives of the Mormon United Order were not models of anarchist organization. They demonstrated a deep commitment to a Christian community, to cooperation, and to creating a society ruled over only by love. Worker-owned cooperatives have been looked to by many anarchists as viable institutional alternatives to capitalist and communist tyranny. So-called communist tyranny is a misnomer. Communism has not existed anywhere. The Soviet Union never achieved communism. The Soviet Union never achieved socialism. And socialism is a precursor to communism. So so-called communist tyranny was not the case. I think that what this author is referring to is the tyranny of the Stalinist system, of the bureaucratic dictatorship. I think that's what he's referring to. The Stalinist system, not communism, which never existed in the Soviet Union because communism was never achieved. Communism is a mode of production where the state has ceased to exist, or where the state withers away. So, there is no such thing as, communist tyranny is not an accurate term to describe the situation in Stalinist Russia, and Stalinist Soviet Union. Okay, back up. Worker-owned cooperatives have been looked up to many by worker-owned cooperatives have been looked to by many anarchists as viable institutional alternatives to capitalist and so-called communist tyranny, because they place the means of production, decision-making power, and profit in the hands of the workers. The Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin, along with many other anarchist writers and agitators, has looked to the cooperative as a minimum requirement for economic democracy. Almost every anarchist experiment in the 20th century has used some sort of cooperative model for running economic enterprises, from the Paris Commune to the Spanish anarchists of Civil War era Spain. Peter Kropotkin's 1902 Mutual Aid affirms that, despite Darwinian notions of survival of the fittest, competition, most communities of species are webs of symbiotic relationships. Exactly, humans are social animals, not individualists. This is correct. Humans survive socially. Mutual aid is an attempt to, although they couldn't survive individually, but optimally they survive collectively or socially. Mutual aid is an attempt to debunk the then pervasive notion that competition and individualism are human laws of nature. Kropotkin states that it is not love to my neighbor, whom I often do not know at all, which induces me to seize a pail of water and to rush towards his house when I see it on fire. It is a far wider, even though more vague feeling of instinct of human solidarity and sociability which moves me, Kropotkin. Kropotkin points to the cooperative nature of indigenous peoples and even medieval European villages before their absorption by nationalist state structures as viable examples of human communities with cooperative economies. During the enclosure movements of the 16th century, European villages struggled against state encroachment, just as Mormon pioneers did in the Utah Territory. These communities, through diverse, use the power of community to meet the needs of everyone, with little emphasis on individual gain. Okay, let's see. I have 1 minute. The economics of anarchism, though varied between the different anarchist schools, emphasize mutual aid and cooperation as a common principle. That is correct, especially so. And I would say that the best developed theory of anarchism, of practical anarchism, would be the Anarcho-Syndicalist Voluntary Association of Cooperative Groups.